Welcome back to the 1% Insight, your podcast for all things B2B technology marketing. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Peters and Will Beech of Moon at Dawn. Chris Peters is the co-founder of Moon at Dawn, and he's a former B2B global client lead at WPP. Will Beech, co-founder at Moon at Dawn, was a former senior customer success manager at Analytica and associate director at Ipsos Synthesio. Welcome to the podcast, lads.
Thanks for having us, Jack.
To frame what you might expect from this conversation is that it's going to be all things B2B influencer marketing. So to get straight into it, lads, what is B2B influencer marketing and why should B2B tech companies be taken seriously?
I guess it's entering kind of the mainstream now. B2B influencer marketing is the way that I put it. It's been often, I started my career in it, 8 or so years ago, and we were kind of in the basement, so to speak, the kind of like nerdy guys that were kind of trying to push this new crazy thing into marketing budgets. And since I started that all those years ago, it just has gone on a huge boom, especially in the tech sector. And I think that's largely down to just what LinkedIn lends itself to. It lends itself to that kind of tech and salesy go-to-market audience. Brands like Clay and Notion, etc., have really led the way on that and really set a precedent that are kind of raising all ships across the tech sector now. And you're seeing lots of startups, even with relatively small budgets, dedicating a huge portion of that to influencer because they're all realizing this is the way that most modern tech brands need to be getting their voice out there. So that's my brief elevator pitch. But Chris, I don't know if you had anything extra to add.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, we're starting to see brands move from talking about B2B influencer marketing to starting to launch B2B influencer marketing campaigns. And what we're certainly seeing from our side is perhaps a broader view of what influencer marketing means for said organization. So Will alluded to like tech has driven the space around influencers, in particular content creators. But what we're seeing now is like more enterprise brands engaged in the space. We're seeing more brands across like sensitive categories who are really interested to work with people of influence, but quite often are perhaps stuck on some ingrained perspectives of what influencer marketing is. And a lot of brands have this perhaps belief that influencer marketing for B2B brands is how we think of B2C, which is, a content creator. And a big part of what Will and I are doing now is like debunking that perception, which is, working with people of influence goes far broader, and in most cases, brands are already doing it, but they just don't call it that. They might call it internal advocacy. They have, people internally that they put front and center, which is influencer marketing. It's just through a slightly different prism. But, the real opportunity is, working with those external people of influence that gives a little bit more substance behind, an internally driven influence program. So yeah, we're seeing, huge appetite. There's been a huge appetite for a few years now, driven by those in tech, driven by LinkedIn. And we've got, something that we typically present those new to the space. And you can see kind of just even in the Google search, there's just one proxy. But you just see it slowly increasing over the last kind of 24 months. And it's been Q1 2026, we see this huge spike. So we see the interest there and we see it broadening beyond just the folks in tech.
It's a very interesting space because it really ties in with how B2B marketing is evolving. Like, we see it all now. It's very mainstream theory and research that's showcasing the changing nature of the B2B buyer and the B2B buying committee. And one of those key areas that in a world now that can be, anyone can build anything they want in a weekend or at least a prototype of it. So we keep hearing doesn't mean it's good. It could be good or bad, probably bad. I don't recommend that. But when brands are selling to their prospects and trying to, bring them into their company, become that go-to solution as either a software or a AI company or a hardware company or managed services, the trust element is becoming critical. So obviously, the moat previously might have been the technology in terms of you had this feature that nobody else has. And that's obviously becoming more difficult to compete with now because the technology everybody has can, at least get you close to it or speed up that development process. So what we're finding now is that the trust element between the B2B technology company and the prospects, and that out of market prospect is specifically because obviously there's a certain amount who are ready to buy right now in market, but the large majority are out of market. And it's like, what do we do with this is future pipeline, these are future customers, this is the future livelihood and revenue of the organization that we need to speak with and build that trust with. How does the B2B influencer marketing help them on that journey in terms of finding a new way to a new avenue or new channel to build that trust, which does, in the end, significantly impact pipeline and revenue?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, you alluded a lot to kind of AI there. And I almost want to start it from that perspective, because obviously anyone with the click of a button, as we all know, can make a blog, can make any form of content, but it's about that authentic lived experience and storytelling that is cutting through now. And that's how brands should be seeking to build that trust. And it's been well established. People are increasingly trusting brands less and trusting people more. But beyond that, in the realm of AI, how can you influence the actual net results of LLMs? And what we're seeing, we've actually done a bunch of our own research on this, is how trusted peer content is regularly the cited source, whether that's individual content creators, academics, experts, etc., or people that we would, from our perspective, define as some variation of influencer, is influencing the net results that come through in those LLM results. And to your point, people, when they're in market, their first thought is to go to an LLM, not to go and pick up the phone and call XYZ salesperson. So it's more important than ever, just from a pure LLM perspective, to be getting peers validating your research, your content, your brand on an ongoing long-term basis, and not these flash in the pan activations. Chris, I don't know if you want to take maybe another element of it.
Yeah, I think from my side, Will kind of touched on it slightly there, was that people trust people. And what I mean by that is that, again, there's various research that reinforces this point. And one in particular, I think it was from Edelman's Trust Barometer research, where 87% of B2B buyers prefer content from those that they like, follow, and trust versus brands themselves. And that's quite telling in itself. So, we have a group of people that are deemed more trustworthy than a brand. And we have these individuals that have the attention of a buyer. So it's a huge untapped opportunity certainly from our perspective. This is why we left our jobs and started a business in the space, because we can see, or we hope to see, where the trend is growing, where people want to engage and immerse themselves with the individuals who have the attention and captive audience that brands ultimately want to engage with. I think that the key is unpacking what that means for a brand, because influencer marketing means different things for different brands across different categories in different shapes and sizes. And it's just moving beyond this expectation that influencer marketing is a few posts on LinkedIn and paying a few people a few $1,000s and it's job done. There's a lot more that goes into influencer marketing to make it work for brands.
We're making this episode very kind of, tactical, what B2B tech marketing leaders and their teams can do, today or over the next kind of few months in terms of implementing potentially a program like this. I guess it's easier to, look at mistakes looking backwards in terms of like best practice and all that. So like in your experiences, why do most B2B influencer marketing programs maybe fail, and what are some of those kind of pitfalls?
Well, I think particularly in the tech space, I would say the most common mistake is, for want of a better word, like betting the house on an individual creator with loads of following, selected based on some kind of vanity metric numbers, a bit of an observational estimation. Maybe someone in the business likes them for whatever reason, and that's the basis for your launch of your program. And it's pretty much the opposite of what we would recommend. So we would ideally recommend you activate a cohort of anywhere between 12 to 15 smaller individuals. But I would say in tech, first look at your customers, because having ingrained knowledge of how the product works, the benefits, what it does for you as a creator, as a business person, whatever it might be, means that you can so much more authentically talk to the subject matter, as opposed to kind of getting a placed ad, essentially, with a large creator that doesn't really have a vested interest in the business. So that would be the key place that I would start. And then it's never done. So be continually curious, continually looking for new people. I mean, it's it's kind of crazy that my job is basically scrolling LinkedIn quite often at the time, which is kind of great. So I'm just always looking for creators, new people. I'm always trying to think, how can I match a person with this brand? But if you're working in that brand, you should be wearing that same sort of hat and thinking, how can I work with as many people as I can, basically?
From my perspective, certainly with the conversations that we've had speaking with our new clients or people that we're speaking with, and we're looking at how they've currently participated in influencer programs, it's clear that the route to market has been lacking that substance that sits behind like who you should work with. And quite often we have brands, when we try and interrogate why they've selected X, Y, and Z influencer, perhaps it's not rooted in the rigor needed to justify like some of the perhaps the investments that they have with said influencers. So a lot of what we've done here, and again, I don't want to use this as a microphone to talk about how wonderful Moon at Dawn is, but we very tactically went to market with a view of looking at the challenges in the space, which was, how are people determining who they want to work with? And we kind of just coined a phrase like vanity and vibes. I don't know if we've actually come up with that phrase, but we quite like it. The 2 V's and not the swear word. Brands are adopting this vanity and vibes, which is, I know this person, they feature on my LinkedIn feed, they've got quite a good engagement, they have good following, they want a few $1,000s. Let's just go and work with them to promote our brand. And that's quite often a recipe for a disaster. And a few years ago, when we had a very generous LinkedIn algorithm, you can get away with that. But at the moment now, when LinkedIn's really honing in on where it serves its content and to who, and the control's been taken away from that organic strategy, there's a lot more rigor and substance that needs to sit behind the strategy. So where we think we're well placed with that is like, how can we give brands the confidence behind who you should work with? So I think moving forward, brands and our competitors and other agencies, it's really getting the rigor behind like who you should work with. So if you want to go and work with Jack Regan, why should you be putting a business case together for Jack Regan? And like, who can we demonstrate that's resonating with him, like that sits within LinkedIn or outside of LinkedIn? What other signals can we get? What other kind of proof points that we can get that reinforce that actually you are a subject matter expert for podcasts? So we have all of these different like signals that we can gather, and it's about just giving confidence that sits behind influencer discovery. And if you have the rigor that sits behind that, that's half the battle. And then it's just overlaying that kind of strategic thought process of like why you're working with influencers. And then if you can squeeze in some creative inspiration, which is Will's forte, all the better. But it's those kind of 3 or 4 components, which is having that overarching strategic view of like why you're working with influencers, the expectations, not splitting the agenda. You don't want an awareness campaign, lead generation campaign, maybe education all kind of rolled into one. It's having one clear goal that's underpinned by who are we working with and why, and how can we justify that? And finally, like what's the creative flair that we're using to get a bit of cut through? We can all do a post on LinkedIn, but how can we do it with a bit more imagination and creativity?
I would just add to that as well, because I think with that level of rigor, this is an experience we've had with a client very recently, where by giving them all that upfront data and framing of who they should be working with, it gave them so much confidence in the campaign that they've essentially commissioned the next campaign, because the results are right there in front of them. It's almost like a media buy, because they know exactly what they're getting by collaborating with those individuals.
Yeah, and I guess it all comes back to trust again. It's the trust of who you're working with, which is just critical in today's buying. It doesn't even matter if you're buying software or agency services. It usually comes down to who's the vendor that I trust to get the job done, and that you're confident in. And it actually, I was listening to a talk at Dublin Tech Summit yesterday, and they had the CEO of the Wall Street Journal speaking about like the future of media, AI, and the truth. I think that was kind of the topic of discussion. And he had mentioned that the Wall Street Journal had their best performing year in terms of revenue last year in the 100 and odd years that it's been running, which you would think, media, more traditional media, journalism, you're like, how can that, still be generating revenue in the age of today, where we hear about social and we hear about all these different things? But he said the main driver of it was people seeking quality and trusted information. There's never been more misinformation and untrusted sources, and they're not verified. People can say whatever they want, which is free speech and 100%. But when you're in a position of making a buying decision, you obviously want the facts and content to be verified. And that kind of rings true to what you guys were saying there in terms of verifying trusted sources that are actually going to make a difference from an influencer campaign. And then for the next part that we're looking to discuss in this episode is, so we looked at some of the common challenges of maybe, choosing untrusted sources, not taking a data or rigorous approach to choosing them. How would you go about setting up the foundations for a company that doesn't have any B2B influencers in their marketing strategy? They might be doing a bit of content, they might be doing a bit of event marketing. They're just trying to get going on this whole B2B influencer marketing. How would you advise them maybe over the course of a few months to give themselves the best chance of success in terms of the foundational work that they should look at when analyzing if a B2B influencer marketing campaign can, work for them?
Yeah, I guess I kind of gave it away a little bit earlier when I mentioned customers, and they're obviously your biggest fans already. So especially in tech, that's a great place to start. A lower lift as well can often be involving them in your existing content programs. If you've got a regular, quarterly report you publish, your events, do you have a podcast? Find those easy wins and opportunities and use that as the vehicle to then grab brand advocates, basically, and just find people you want to work with that you're fans of. And you'll be surprised, more often than not, people will do things like that for free as well, as opposed to just, gaining access to someone's reach. It's understandable they're going to want to charge you for that. But if you present them with a really exciting, fun opportunity, conversation, something to elevate their profile or make them seem like an expert, that can be a really good way for quite low budget to get involved with some quite interesting, influential experts. So I guess that would be my number one tip.
For me, one of the barriers that we've come up working with different brands is the question around how do you measure this stuff? And our candid view on that is you want to roll in an influencer program or pilot that has the best chance of success. So how are you currently measuring your other programs, whether it is awareness, whether it's lead generation, if it's traffic driving, whatever it is that you typically adopt as an organization, work backwards from, let's set ourselves up with a campaign that we can run that allows us to compare to what's already in market. So we've got a benchmark in place. Let's look at how we can roll in an influencer-led lead generation campaign. If we have thought leadership that's front and center of how you drive business, let's introduce co-authored thought leadership with external academics, those that are highly regarded in their industry, and let's weave them into co-authored thought leadership, and then let's look at the barometer of success with what you're already doing. So it's just trying to level set to give a new program the chance. And quite often, we have brands that are deterred because they think of this top of funnel, a few LinkedIn posts, how can you measure that to pipeline? And we don't really think about it through that prism. We always trying to ascertain what are you working on at the moment, and how can we do a complementary program that is influencer first that you can compare against internally.
So we spoke about some of the common pitfalls of why B2B influencer campaigns fail before they even get started or could even showcase the ROI, how to avoid those kind of common pitfalls. We spoke there about what you can do foundationally in terms of the first 3 months, just getting started in terms of a few key points. For the listeners tuning in, 12 months down the line, what would a successful B2B influencing program look like in full motion? What would be happening? What would be getting measured? Who'd be involved? What would that look like 12 months down the line if, their B2B influencing campaign was a success?
It's probably a bit of a boring answer, but it really is just, can you demonstrate that the campaign that you set out to launch has expanded and scaled? So whether that is, you start with a social advocacy program, which might start with, half a dozen, 10, a dozen different influencers. Does that look like a campaign 12 months later where you have influencers of residence, so people that are featuring consistently every month? Do you have programs where you have a clear test and learn strategy? Are you working with 25, 30 different influencers in any particular month? Or whether it's a lead gen campaign, Have you switched your, pilot, 10, 15K pilot that's maybe influencer led to drive leads? Is that expanded to be always on? Does it play a key component to your content syndication, your lead generating program? And it's just demonstrating always on and expansion.
Yeah, I don't know too much more to add. I guess it's just having it integrated across your whole go-to-market motion, because I think there's obviously that it's an obvious thing to start. It's a pilot. It's adjacent to everything else that you're doing, but influencers can run horizontally through everything: your events, your content, your PR strategy, everything across the business. And that's an example, I think, what Chris was alluding to there, of a successful influencer program, in my view. Worth cautioning, if you do that in 12 months, I think you're doing really well. That's probably one of the more sophisticated brands, but something to aim for, at least.
That was a fantastic insight in terms of, everything from starting a B2B influencer marketing campaign, what to avoid, what to focus on. And before I get bored of your 1% insights, we have a rapid fire round on the 1% Insight podcast. So we can kick it off. And Chris, if you'd like to answer, and then we'll run one question at a time. So Chris, what is the best resource for B2B or B2B technology marketers, whether that's a book, a podcast, a newsletter, anything you'd recommend?
So I've got two answers, and I'm going to cheat. The first answer is, again, a shameless plug of a newsletter called B2B Excellence that's been in market for 4 years now, that aggregates positively provocative, contrarian points of view in B2B marketing. But personally, I like a diverse suite of podcasts to consume. So depending on what my mood is, I have podcasts such as My First Million, if I'm feeling a little bit more in the entrepreneurial spirit. But then actually, if I want some more B2B, perhaps tech first content, I will seek out probably Dave Gerhardt's Exit 5. But then I'll have Agency Giants for more inspiration for growing our agency. Joel Harrison, your old one of your old former guests. I love his Trust and Influence podcast. So I like to kind of mix it up with a bit of diversity based on the mood.
Nice.
And what about yourself, Will?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of YouTube, so I love YouTube content, and there's tons of creators. It's quite a small channel actually, and it's not too marketing relevant, but I really like their content. I think it's called Good Talk, I think is his name. I'll send you the link afterwards to make sure I'm saying the right person. It's kind of interesting because it's very current affairs but comedic, and he covers lots of tech companies and what's going on in those businesses with a humorous tone, which I really like. And I guess from a newsletter perspective, there's a person who's a friend of Moon at Dawn called Mike Harty, who does a great newsletter about the advertising industry, what's going on in programmatic, everything like that. And I find it super fascinating, and it's very detailed and lots of rich insight. So yeah, probably my two that come to mind.
No, I like the Good Work actually, Will. That's it's by Morning Brew, I think, and it's is it Dan Toomey they have running it. I've seen the channel before. I think it's run by Morning Brew, or there's something close to that anyway.
Yeah. I'm not 100%, but that's my kind of style. I like it to be kind of just like an influencer campaign. If it straddles that line of kind of entertaining and educational at the same time, I think you're onto something really good there. Yeah,
100%. So Chris, a company, and you can't say Moon at Dawn, that's doing great B2B tech marketing right now, or B2B marketing in general?
Yeah, again, there's a couple of obvious answers, such as Clay and Ramp. And the reason why I say those two is Ramp, I love that they push the creative boundaries. I'm sure you saw Kevin from the office, PR Stunt. I thought that was genius. How that got approved, I'll never know. So yeah, well done to the internal marketing team there. I also like just Clay's influencer program. It's just so well done. It's been a pinnacle and key component to what's driven their success over the last few years, and just having user generated content and how they've just galvanized a whole community around it, and it's exclusive. So very, very smart. But there's a couple of simple executions that I really like, and one was from an agency called Ammunition, and this is just an agency. I think it's a B2B agency, and they just kicked off the UK launch with a really simple activation, which was PR hijacking. So the chap called John Evans, uncensored CMO podcast host, I was also on my top 5 list. I knew I forgot one. It was that chap. It was John, and he's done his first in-person event, 400 senior marketers, CMOs, and one agency done and just respect the hustle was that they took over the out-of-home placements in central London in around the events, and then they had 3 influencers that talked about that particular stunt on the way to the event together, and they had one of the senior marketers talk about it outside the event. They grabbed John, so it was just really, really simple, and I featured it in my newsletter, and it's been one of the highest, and I used it as the masterpiece, and it's been like one of my most featured and read articles. So I just really respected the smarts that went behind that.
And I guess for me, the 2 that came to mind are like the programs that become so successful that the people running them kind of become influencers and celebrities in their own right. And the 2 that come to mind are Sarah Adam for Wix, and also I think her name's Emily Cook for Vector, I think her name is. And whenever I open my feed, they're constantly there, and they've almost become influencers in their own right in the B2B influencer world. And that's quite a novel position to be in the market. And I think it's a testament to how respected their programs are among people in our industry.
We'll get there, Will.
We will, indeed. Yeah.
If you weren't in marketing, Chris, what would you be doing?
I don't know, like maybe like a sales job. I think when I was in between school and doing this, that, I kind of looked at sales. I don't know what sales means, but just some sort of sales role, I think.
Because marketing has always been like a bit of a creative expression for me. So as Chris knows, I always like coming up with crazy ideas for campaigns and stuff. So it would have to be something in the creative industries. I mean, I don't know where if it's something like television or production or maybe even music. You can see the guitar behind me there, but something along those lines probably. Yeah. Fantastic.
Before we get into the 1% insight, I'd like to thank you both for your time today. What is your 1% insight that you'd like to leave with our audience, Chris?
Well, firstly, I don't know if you want to do a podcast first where you can maybe have Will sing us out with his guitar as he's chopped that in. I don't know.
Maybe a jingle one day.
That might be your creative expression there, Will. But just in terms of my 1% insight, is to look at B2B influencer marketing through a prism of like what influence is, and looking beyond perhaps how people associate influencer marketing to content creators. And it's looking at those subject matter experts, maybe often coined key opinion leaders, external thought leaders, external advocates, and looking at the role that these individuals can play for your influencer strategy, whilst the category and your competitors are gravitating towards content creators, which is a very important part to an influencer strategy. One of the more opportunistic roles to engage at the moment is those subject matter experts.
Cool. And I guess for me, it's I've alluded to this a bit in my other answers, but integrating thought leaders, experts, influencers into your whole go-to-market mix. But the way to do that is to think about them at the beginning of the process. Not, I have an asset, give it to an influencer to promote, but think, I'm working on an asset. How can I collaborate with someone? Because that's where you get the compounding benefit of the whole time that bit of content's in market. You've got this trusted individual participating in it. So I'd say that's my number one thing to get compounding influence.
Fantastic. And just before we wrap up, where can our listeners find both of you and learn more about what you do?
Yep, great. I think if you just type in Chris Peters or Will Beech in Moon at Dawn on LinkedIn, I'm sure you'll find us.
Brilliant. Thank you very much both for your time today, guys.
Thanks Jack. Cheers, mate.